Hi everybody, I'm Bill Sanders and this is Watch Outside, the art and science of watch collection. Today we're going to be talking about the effect or the influence of Abraham-Louis Breguet. And he's from, originally he was from Neuchâtel, which is now Switzerland. At the time it was Prussia. He went from there to Paris, and then there was a French Revolution, and he got in trouble because he was one of the made good friends with Marie Antoinette and was doing some stuff with the royalty. So he went back to Switzerland, and then in Switzerland he went to England, and then went back to Paris. Okay, so he's probably, as far as a watchmaker is concerned, is as much French as he is, probably more so than Prussian. But anyhow, so we're going to take a look at some of the things that he did. Now, first of all, I just wanted to go over some of the inventions that he had. He had an improved self-winding watch. I don't know if he was given full credit for self-winding or not, but he had an improved one. He had the Breguet balance spring with the overcoil, which was his. And he had something called the parachute, which is a shock absorber. And when you stop and think about it, when somebody's parachuting out of an airplane and the parachute slows them down, that works as a shock absorber. Had another thing, which to me is extremely important. This is a constant force escapement. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, he had, these are some of the more minor things, the gong spring, for repeaters. He had the Breguet hands. Now the Breguet hands with those little balls at the top, they existed before Breguet, but he did some more things to them. They came to be known as Breguet hands. What's a lot of people say, well, why is that important? It's a lot easier to read the hands on your watch with the little balls on the end. What were they called? Apples. That was the term they used. And it was, these were actually Lapine hands, and he fixed them up. The Arabic numbers or numerals, this was surprised me when they gave him credit for that. I guess Roman numerals was what everyone had been using, and then he introduced Arabic numerals. The guilloche on the dials, what was called the Breguet key for winding up watches. There's a subscription watch. We'll talk about that in a bit. There is something called the sympathique clock. What it would do, it would wind in set watches. And then he had something called the Montre Attack, which is had the dials on the outside of the case, so that a person in the dark could feel it and find the time, or a blind person could find it, use it to find the time. Sort of a lot of interesting things that he did. Okay, let's take a look now at how he came to modern watches. And more than anyone else, I think, is at the work of George Daniels. He wrote a book called The Art of Breguet, and in it, he laid out all of the kinds of things that Breguet did. He also had another book that he did, and a lot of the things that Breguet had started. This is his most famous book called Simply Watchmaking by George Daniels. And it's something that is, as watchmakers, not pretentious watchmakers like me, but real watchmakers, is that they used, because the guy was so smart. I mean, he's smart about watches. The two at the top up there are a couple of Louis Breguet watches, or Abraham-Louis Breguet watches. The one at the bottom, the two at the bottom are by George Daniels. And you can see certain similarities in the watches. Now, the next person is sort of in this sort of straight line is Roger Smith. And Roger Smith was I guess they'd call it an intern or trainee or an apprentice to George Daniels. Smith took his first watch that he built and he took it to Daniels and he said, "Look at this, I'd like to be your apprentice." And Daniels said, it's awful. He had to take it back, and he worked on it for a year or so and then came back, and Daniels was impressed by it. But here again, you can see the influence of Breguet. This is one of his watches called the Series 1. Now, the next guy is really very interesting, and probably in terms of a business, has had a great deal of influence by Breguet. And this is Francois Paul Jorn, F.P. Jorn. And the watch at the top has this constant force set up by having two springs, and they only use the middle 60%, so the force is more constant. And the other one at the bottom is a resonance. This was something else that wasn't invented by Breguet, but I think it was Javier was the guy who sort of used it first, but he used it in a great big clock. And at the bottom down there, the one on the left is a resonance watch that Breguet made, and then to the right of that, I mean, the one on the left, the all gold one, is the one that Breguet did. The one on the right is the one F.P. Jorn did. In fact, it's this one. And the thing about it is that the book that's less well known than George Daniels' watchmaking is The Art of Breguet, and this became almost like a Bible to F.P. Jorn. And so late in his life, about a year before he died, F.P. Jorn gave him a watch, and on the back it said, F.P. to George Daniels, my mentor. Now, it was, a nice thought, but I think the mentorship that F.P. Jorn had was through The Art of Breguet. By the way, I have that watch too. This is the same watch. I figure, well, this must be a pretty good one, because if he gave it to George Daniels, he gave him the platinum version of the Chronometre Surveillance. Must be a pretty good watch. So I got this one that I have is not copy, but sort of rendition of Breguet's resonance watch. Okay, now here, moving along, there's sort of an interesting guy. This guy here, he's part of the Independent Watchmakers Association. The guy's 28 years old. He's not an old man, but boy, his watches are incredible. His name is Cyril Brevet Nadeau, and he's from Breton, France. And this is one of his watches called the Eccentricity. Now, one of the things, the reason that I brought this guy up and the watch he talked about how influenced he was, not just by Breguet, but all of the old-timey guys. And an interesting thing I learned about Breguet was that he didn't particularly care for the keyless works. In other words, he didn't like to have a crown and to wind up, but rather he preferred to have a key to wind up and they were pocket watches. And so I don't know how much this affected Brevet Nadeau, but they're looking at the sort of the craftsmanship of the old masters, and I think that I see that as an extremely positive direction for the new breed, shall we say. All right, now this one, as I saw this, I thought, wow, this is really a neat watch. Well, it looks like a Breguet, especially that big, well, I don't know what you'd call it, triangle-shaped rotor or weight at the bottom of the swinging rotor that they had. Well, it turns out that it was by Michel Gianni. It's his Breguet, it's called subscription watch. It's same as subscription. What Breguet did later on in his career was that he would sell his watches ahead of time, and people could subscribe to them. And so they had a series of subscription watches, and then he was asked some years ago. I think this was, in fact, Michel Parmigiani, I think, may have done this watch before he started his own watch business. And then the Sandoz, it may have been one of the reasons the Sandoz family said, look, we got to get this guy and we'll have him make watches. And he did. And I have a couple of his watches. But just in looking at it, just, wow. This was part of a two-watch thing. There was a wristwatch and then this watch, and they were part of an auction some years ago in honor of Breguet. So anyway, all right. Now, in looking at the company that is now Brigade Watches, I don't have any Brigade watches, but I sure would like one, I decided. And not the usual ones. I think the most popular Breguet is the sports watch, the 20, the Type 20, something like that. But the ones I like are the ones that they came out with called the Tradition. And Tradition was based on the Breguet subscription watch. It's called a subscription, something like that. My French is pretty bad. But anyway, so this was one of his subscription watches, and so what Brigade decided to do, the companies, which is owned by Swatch, they said, look, why don't we come out with a series of watches called Tradition. So you have Brigade Tradition watches, and this is one of them called the 7027. Now, this was an early one. They don't make these anymore. And it was, I think, 38 millimeters, or 37 millimeters. And I don't know, it was too small for some, too big for others, who knows. But this was one of the early ones, and you could just look at it, and you can see the influence of Breguet. Now, they still have them. Here's another one. This one is called the 7097. And it has the caliber 505 SRI in it, which is automatic and 3 hertz. By the way, the first one we looked at, I think, is either 2.5 or 3 hertz. All of these are under 4 hertz. And in this one, they give it a number. Seiko does the same thing, drives me nuts. I like names. Okay, so the 7097 is an automatic, and they even have the rotor look like the ones that Breguet had. They remind me of a guillotine for some reason. Whoop! But guillotines weren't that way, I know. Okay, so this is one Breguet. Now another Breguet tradition, just really blew my mind. I said, tourbillon was developed originally by Breguet, and so not only do they put in a tourbillon in this caliber 569, they put in a fusee chain. And the nice thing about it is you can see it from the dial of the watch. Now this thing is, I think it's $97,000. These are crazy high prices we're getting into here. In fact, I was checking out the Chrono 24 to see what they had with the Traditions, and I think the least expensive one they had was like 11,000, something in that neighborhood. And I don't know whether they were new or used. It depends on where they're from. Sometimes they can't sell things. This one runs. This is a hand wound one, by the way, and it runs at 2.5 hertz. Now you may remember a while back we had discovered that the very best watchmakers were using this lower speed, under 4 hertz, and this was 2.5 hertz. So I thought that was sort of cool too on here. Okay, the final one, this is a woman's model, and it has a caliber 505 SR. Now, notice it is an automatic, and it runs at 3 hertz. And if you look at the the rotor on it, or the rotor weight, totally different than that sort of weaponized looking rotor on the men's version. This is called the Tradition Dom 7038 Automatique. And man, I tell you, and it's got some diamonds around it. Nice looking watch. And I think I'm pretty sure it's 38 millimeters. So it won't be too big. That might be a little big for women. Also, you see up in the upper left there, you can see the power reserve indicator. A lot of these have the power reserve indicators on it. I didn't mention it. There's a lot going on. You can look at the movement and so forth from the front. Now, this is, I think it's not skeletonized, but it's sort of like an open kind of dial on it, so you can see the movement from the front, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, well, listen, this is not only did Breguet, I mean, they ended up, the ironic thing that Breguet, the company Breguet, which is owned by Swatch, it was only about maybe 10, 11, about 10, 15 years ago that they started up with the Tradition. Up until then, they were making, like everyone else, sports watches, dress watches, and so forth, that really, and they still do, that weren't exactly the kind of thing that from Breguet, but they want to make modern watches. But you can see the influence throughout in all of these top watchmakers, certainly with George Daniels and Roger Smith, F.P. Jorn, but also too, much to my surprise, there was Michel, Parma, Gianni thing, and of course we would expect it in Breguet branded watches. Well, listen, really like to hear your opinion about this watch and these watches and this kind of watches. And man, I tell you, what I would love to see from Breguet would be something in stainless steel, one of the simple hand wound, time only, maybe with a power reserve indicator of this style of watch. That would be more fun. Maybe have a brass in the back for the movement to make it look more authentic. Anyway, let's hear your opinion. As always, like to hear from you. And this is an invitation to subscribe if you like. And then on Sunday, we're going to have another collection review, and I think you're going to like it. Till then, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection.